The morning sun cast long shadows across the metal buildings of New Haven Colony as Emma Carter skipped along the dusty path between the housing units. Her blonde hair bounced with each step while she hummed a song her mother had taught her the night before. The 12-year-old girl carried a small basket filled with fresh vegetables from the hydroponics lab, where her mother worked every day growing food for the 300 humans who called this distant world home. Kepler-442c was not like Earth with its blue skies and white clouds. Here the sky held a greenish tint, and 2 small moons hung visible even during daylight hours. The air tasted different too, but Emma had lived here since she was 5 years old, so it felt normal to her now. She loved exploring the rocky hills and strange purple plants that grew wild beyond the colony walls, even though her parents always told her to stay close to home. The Zephyrians lived on the other side of the Great Valley, about 20 miles away from New Haven. Emma had seen them flying overhead sometimes with their massive wings spread wide against the green sky. They looked like the dragons from the old Earth, stories her father read to her, but these dragons were real, and they did not breathe fire. Instead, they had scales that changed colors like jewels and eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. Most of the adults in the colony feared the Zephyrians, but Emma thought they were beautiful. Jake Carter stood in the main engineering bay checking the power readings on his tablet when Commander Alex Stone walked through the heavy metal doors. The 2 men had worked together for 8 years, keeping the colony running and protecting its people from the harsh environment of this alien world. Jake looked up from his work and saw the worried expression on the commander's face. The Zephyrians sent another message this morning, Alex said as he stopped beside the large fusion generator that powered the entire colony. High Warden Kethvar wants us to stop mining in Sector 7 immediately. He claims we are violating the old agreements our governments made 20 years ago. Jake set down his tablet and wiped his hands on a dirty cloth. The rare earth metals they found in Sector 7 were worth more than anything else the colony had discovered since they arrived on this world. Without those metals, they could not trade with Earth for the supplies they needed to survive. What did you tell him? Jake asked. I told him we would discuss it with our people, but we both know we cannot stop the mining operation, Alex replied. Those metals are the only reason Earth keeps sending us supply ships. Without them, we would be abandoned out here, just like the colonies on Rigel 4 and New Tau Ceti. Emma finished, delivering vegetables to Mrs. Henderson, who lived in the apartment next to the medical center. Dr. Karen White was Emma's godmother and the best doctor on New Haven. She had helped bring Emma into the world 12 years ago and had watched her grow from a tiny baby into the curious and brave girl she was today. Karen always had time to listen to Emma's stories about the interesting rocks she found or the strange sounds she heard coming from the wilderness at night. Did you see the Zephyrian ships flying over the colony yesterday? Emma asked as she sat on the examination table in Karen's office. There were 3 of them, and they were so big I could see the sunlight shining through their wings. Karen smiled and checked Emma's scraped knee from where she had fallen while climbing rocks near the perimeter fence. You need to be more careful when you go exploring, she said gently. The Zephyrians have been acting strange lately, and your parents worry about you wandering too far from home. But they are not dangerous, Emma protested. I can feel it when they fly overhead. They are sad about something, but they are not angry at us. At least not all of them are angry. Far across the valley in the ancient stone city of Velthara, the massive dragon known as Seer, Veltharos perched on the highest tower, watching the human colony through eyes that had seen 1,000 years pass. Like days, his crystalline scales caught the afternoon light and scattered rainbow patterns on the carved walls around him. For centuries, he had observed the rise and fall of civilizations on dozens of worlds, but something about these humans fascinated him in ways He could not understand. The young human female, who often walked near the border between their territories, reminded him of someone from long ago, though he could not remember who. Her fearless curiosity and kind heart seemed to shine like a beacon even from this great distance. The other Zephyrians in the War Council spoke of the humans as thieves and invaders, but Valtheros saw something different when he watched them work together to survive on this harsh world. Warden Kethver spread his golden wings and landed on the tower beside the ancient seer. The humans refused to stop their mining operations, he announced with anger in his voice. They show no respect for our territorial rights or the sacred places of our ancestors. Warcast Mordek believes we should drive them from this world before they multiply like insects and consume everything. Valtheros turned his great head to study the younger dragon. Kethvar was barely 300 years old and had never known peace with any alien species. War brings only death and sorrow, the seer replied in a voice like distant thunder. Perhaps there is another way to solve this dispute. You have grown soft in your old age, Kethver said with disrespect that would have cost any other dragon their life. The humans understand only strength and violence. Mordek will teach them the price of defying the Zephyrian Empire. That evening, Emma sat with her parents at their small dining table eating dinner and talking about their day. Lisa Carter had spent 12 hours in the hydroponics lab trying to develop a new strain of corn that would grow better in the alien soil. Jake had worked on repairing the water purification system that kept breaking down due to the high mineral content in the underground streams they used for drinking water. I want to visit the Zephyrian city someday, Emma said as she pushed vegetables around on her plate. I bet they have amazing libraries and art galleries just like the cities on Earth that you showed me in the history books. Her parents exchanged worried glances across the table. The Zephyrians are not like us, honey, Lisa said carefully. They have their own culture and customs that we might not understand. It would be better if you stayed close to the colony where we know you are safe. But how will we ever become friends with them if we never try to talk to each other? Emma asked with the simple logic that only children possess. Maybe they are just lonely and scared like we are sometimes. Jake reached across the table and took his daughter's small hand in his larger one. You have a good heart, Emma, but the universe can be a dangerous place. Promise me, you will not try to visit the Zephyrians without permission from Commander Stone. Emma looked into her father's eyes and saw the love and fear there. She did not want to lie to him, but she also felt something calling to her from across the valley where the ancient dragons lived in their stone towers. I promise I will be careful, Daddy, she said, which was not exactly the same thing as promising to stay away from the Zephyrians, but it was the best she could do. Warcast Mordek gathered his followers in a hidden cave deep in the mountains between the human and Zephyrian territories. 12 younger dragons, who believed that violence was the only solution to the human problem, listened as their leader outlined his plan to send a message that even the stubborn aliens would understand. They would capture one of the humans and make an example that would force the rest to abandon their mining operations and leave this world forever. Emma woke before sunrise and slipped quietly out of her family's apartment while her parents still slept. She had dreamed again about the ancient dragon she sometimes saw perched on the distant tower, watching over the valley. In her dream, the dragon had seemed sad and lonely, just like she felt sometimes when the adults talked about wars and treaties she did not understand. She packed some food and water in her small backpack and walked through the empty streets toward the colony's eastern gate. The security guard at the gate was half asleep in his chair and did not notice the small girl slip through the gap in the yop fence where maintenance crews entered and left the compound. Emma had discovered this route during her previous explorations and knew exactly how to avoid the motion sensors that would alert Commander Stone to her departure. She felt bad about disobeying her parents, but something deep inside her heart told her this journey was important. The rocky terrain beyond. New Haven stretched for miles in every direction, with strange blue grass growing in patches between the stones. Emma followed a small stream that wound its way toward the mountains, where she hoped to get a better view of the Zephyrian city. The two small moons were still visible in the brightening sky and cast weird shadows that made every boulder and hill look like sleeping monsters. Sir Valtherus felt the disturbance in the morning air long before he saw the small human figure moving across the landscape below his perch. His ancient senses could detect the emotional resonance of all living creatures within many miles, and the young female's mixture of curiosity and determination created ripples in what his people called the great current that flows through all life. He spread his massive wings and glided silently through the green sky to get a closer look at this brave little explorer. From his new position on a cliff overlooking the stream Emma was following, Valtherus watched the human child with growing fascination. She moved with confidence through terrain that would challenge adult members of her species, and showed no fear of the unknown dangers that lurked in the wilderness. When she stopped to drink from the stream, she spoke softly to a small lizard that was basking on a nearby rock, as if she expected it to understand and respond to her words. Warcast Mordick and his followers had been tracking the human child for over an hour, using their superior senses to follow her scent trail through the maze of rocks and ravines. The dragon warrior was pleased that one of the aliens had made his task so easy by wandering far from the protection of their colony. This small female would send the perfect message to her people about the price of defying Zephyrian authority. Emma climbed steadily upward through a narrow canyon that would eventually lead to a high plateau where she hoped to see the ancient city in the distance. The walls of the canyon rose hundreds of feet on both sides and blocked out most of the morning sunlight. She was so focused on finding secure footholds for her climb that she did not hear the soft sound of claws on stone until it was too late to run. 12 dragon warriors surrounded the human child in a circle of scales and teeth and glowing eyes. Their leader stepped forward and spoke in accented but understandable human language. "You have trespassed on sacred Zephyrian territory, little alien. Your people must learn that there are consequences for such disrespect." Emma felt her heart beating fast with fear, but she stood as straight and tall as her small body would allow. "I did not mean any disrespect, sir. I just wanted to see your beautiful city and maybe learn about your culture. My name is Emma Carter, and I live in New Haven Colony with my parents." Mordeck laughed with cruel amusement at the child's politeness and bravery. "Your parents should have taught you better manners, human. Now you will pay the price for their failures as leaders and teachers." High above the canyon, Sir Valtherus watched in growing horror as Mordick's warriors bound the human child with metal chains that were designed to hold creatures much larger and stronger than a 12-year-old girl. Ancient laws prevented him from interfering in the affairs of other Zephyrian castes, but every instinct in his 1,000-year-old soul screamed at him to act. The great current that connected all living things began to pulse with distress signals that only the most sensitive dragons could perceive. Emma was dragged to a flat area at the bottom of the canyon where Mordick had prepared tools and devices that were clearly designed to cause pain. The dragon warrior wanted her suffering to last long enough to be properly recorded and transmitted to the human colony as a warning message. He activated a small camera that would broadcast everything to New Haven, where her parents and friends would be forced to watch. "Tell your people to abandon their mining operations and leave our world," Mordick commanded as he heated a metal rod in a small fire. "Tell them that this is what happens to thieves and trespassers who do not respect Zephyrian sovereignty." Emma looked directly into the camera with tears running down her face, but her voice remained steady and clear. "Mommy and Daddy, I love you so much. Please don't be angry at the Zephyrians. because of what happens to me. This dragon is just scared and angry, but that doesn't mean all of them are bad. I still believe we can be friends with them someday." Val Thoreaus felt something breaking inside his ancient heart as he watched the human child's courage in the face of unimaginable cruelty. In all his centuries of existence, he had never witnessed such pure innocence and forgiveness from any creature facing torture and death. The great current began to resonate with frequencies he had not felt since the earliest days of his species, when they were still connected to the universal life force that binds all consciousness together. For 36 minutes the torture continued, while Emma spoke words of love and hope instead of hatred and revenge. She asked about her parents and whether they were watching. She worried about her friend Dr. Corinne White, who would be sad when she did not return home. She even expressed concern for Mordick himself, saying that he must be very unhappy inside to do such terrible things to a child who had never hurt anyone. The ancient seer watched every moment of the human child's suffering, while something fundamental shifted in his consciousness. The laws that had bound him to non-interference for 1,000 years suddenly seemed less important than the voice of innocence crying out for mercy in the canyon below. But he was too late to save her. By the time Val Thoreaus overcame his ancient programming and dove toward the canyon floor, Emma Carter had already given her final breath to the universe. Mordick stood over the small broken body and felt a moment of doubt about what he had done. The human child's words of forgiveness and hope had touched something in his warrior's heart that he thought was dead. He looked up at the camera and spoke his final message to the human colony. Let this be a lesson to all who would steal from the Zephyrian Empire. Leave our world or share this child's fate. Val Thoreaus landed in the canyon just as Mordick and his warriors prepared to leave. The ancient dragon's eyes burned with grief and rage as he looked down at Emma's still form. What have you done? He whispered in a voice that shook the stone walls around them. I have sent a message that even humans can understand, Mordick replied with false confidence. Now they will abandon their illegal mining and leave us in peace. The seer knelt beside Emma's body and gently touched her forehead with one massive claw. Through his connection to the great current, he could feel the echo of her final thoughts, still resonating through the quantum field that connects all conscious beings. Her courage and love and hope had created ripples that were spreading outward through space and time in ways that would change everything in the distance. The communication. A rays of New Haven colony fell silent as Jake and Lisa Carter collapsed in grief after watching their daughter's final moments. Commander Stone ordered all mining operations suspended while Dr. Corinne White wept over the medical equipment she would never need to use on Emma again. Across the colony, 300 humans mourned the loss of the bright young girl who had brought joy to their harsh existence on this alien world. But something else was happening in the quantum foam, beneath reality itself. Emma's final act of forgiveness and her unwavering belief in the possibility of peace had created a resonance cascade in the great current that was building towards something unprecedented. Val Thoreaus could feel it growing stronger with each passing moment, like a storm gathering energy before it transforms the landscape forever. Exactly 36 minutes after Emma Carter drew her last breath, something unprecedented happened across all of human space. On Earth, where billions of people were going about their daily lives, Admiral Ryan Brooks was sitting in his office reviewing fleet deployment reports when every nerve in his body suddenly blazed with an indescribable sensation. For one perfect moment he felt the courage and love and forgiveness of a 12-year-old girl facing death with grace and dignity that surpassed anything he had experienced in 40 years of military service. The feeling lasted only seconds, but when it faded, Admiral Brooks found that his mind worked differently than it had moments before. Complex tactical problems that would normally take hours to solve became clear in minutes. He could see patterns in enemy fleet movements, that had been invisible to him before. Most importantly, he felt an unshakable conviction that humanity must never again allow such innocence to be destroyed by hatred and violence. Dr. Sam Turner was working late in his laboratory at the Cambridge Research Institute, studying brain scans of test subjects when the wave hit him like lightning. The xenopsychologist had spent his career trying to understand how different species process consciousness and emotion, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for the flood of pure empathy that washed through his neural pathways. When the sensation passed, he discovered that he could perceive the emotional states of every person within 100 meters of his location. On the battleship, UES Defiant Captain Nina Ross was conducting routine patrol duties in the outer system when her entire crew suddenly stopped what they were doing and turned to look at each other with expressions of wonder and confusion. The ship's artificial intelligence reported massive spikes in neural activity throughout the vessel, but medical scans showed no signs of illness or injury. Instead, the crew seemed to be operating with enhanced coordination and intuition that defied scientific explanation. Major Chris Bell and his special operations team were conducting training exercises on Mars when the phenomenon struck the remote base. All 12 soldiers experienced the same moment of clarity, followed by abilities that should have been impossible. They could anticipate each other's movements during combat drills and seemed to share tactical insights without speaking. Most disturbing was their unanimous agreement that something terrible had happened to a human child somewhere in the galaxy and that they were now responsible for ensuring it never happened again. The wave of transformation spread through human colonies on hundreds of worlds in patterns that physicists would later determine traveled faster than light itself. On New Geneva, a mining engineer named Pete Johnson suddenly understood how to extract rare metals with half the environmental impact his current methods required. On Kepler Station, a communications officer named Beth Clark found herself able to decode alien languages that had puzzled xenolinguists for decades. Back on New Haven, Colony Jake Carter sat beside his daughter's empty bed, holding her favorite stuffed animal while his wife Lisa wept in the next room. The grief threatened to destroy him completely, but underneath the pain, he felt something else growing stronger with each passing hour. His mind was processing engineering problems with clarity he had never possessed before, and he could sense the emotional states of everyone in the colony as if they were extensions of his own consciousness. Commander Alex Stone called an emergency meeting of all senior staff to discuss the strange reports flooding in from across human space. Dr. Karen White arrived at the conference room with dark circles under her eyes from crying, but her medical training had been enhanced by whatever force had touched their species. She could now diagnose illnesses and injuries with accuracy that bordered on the supernatural. Every human colony and space station is reporting the same phenomenon, Alex announced to the assembled group. Enhanced cognitive abilities, increased empathy, and some kind of shared consciousness that allows unprecedented coordination between individuals. Earth Command is calling it the awakening, and they want answers we don't have. It started exactly 36 minutes after Emma died. Lisa said quietly from her seat at the conference table. I felt her last thoughts somehow. Her courage and love for all of us, including the dragons who killed her. She forgave them, Alex. Even as they tortured her to death, she was still hoping we could find a way to live in peace. On Earth, the phenomenon was creating chaos in government centers and military installations as leaders struggled to understand what had happened to their species. President Margaret Wells convened an emergency session of the Global Security Council where every participant reported similar experiences of enhanced mental abilities and overwhelming empathy for their fellow humans. The transformation appears to be permanent, reported Dr. Helen Chong, the world's leading expert on human consciousness. Brain scans show fundamental changes in neural pathways, particularly in regions associated with intuition, pattern recognition, and emotional processing. Whatever caused this has literally evolved our species overnight. Admiral Brooks stood before the assembled leaders and shared his own experience of the awakening moment. I felt the courage of a child facing death with forgiveness in her heart. Every human who has reported this phenomenon describes the same basic experience. We have been touched by something that demands we become better than we were. The military implications were staggering. Human forces that had never worked together before were suddenly coordinating their efforts with precision that amazed their commanding officers. Intelligence networks were sharing information with unprecedented efficiency. Most importantly, every human in uniform felt an absolute commitment to protecting innocent life regardless of species or origin. On distant frontier worlds, colonists reported similar transformations. Farmers could sense the needs of their crops with uncanny accuracy. Engineers solved problems that had plagued them for years. Teachers found their students learning at rates that doubled previous educational standards. But the most significant change was social rather than individual. Humans who had been divided by politics, religion, and cultural differences suddenly found common ground in their shared experience of the awakening. Ancient prejudices seemed petty and meaningless compared to the overwhelming sense of unity that connected every member of their species. For the first time in human history, the entire civilization was moving toward a single purpose with the coordination of a collective organism. Dr. Sam Turner published the first scientific analysis of the awakening phenomenon just 72 hours after it occurred. His research showed that human brain activity had increased by an average of 30% across all measured categories, but the most remarkable finding was the evidence of quantum entanglement between human minds. Somehow the death of Emma Carter had created a resonance effect that linked every human consciousness in a network of shared experience and enhanced ability. "We are no longer the same species we were 3 days ago," Turner announced to the Global Science Council. The transformation appears to be irreversible and is showing signs of continued development. Our children born after the awakening demonstrate even more pronounced abilities than the adults who experienced the initial change. Back on Kepler 442c, Valtheros felt the changing currents in the quantum field that surrounds all life. The great current that his people had long forgotten was singing with harmonies he had not heard since the earliest days of Zephyrian civilization. The human child's sacrifice had awakened something far more significant than enhanced mental abilities. In her own species, it had re-established connections between consciousness and the fundamental forces of the universe that most sentient beings had lost eons ago. High Warden Kethvar arrived at Vultharos's tower with news from the Zephyrian intelligence networks. The humans are mobilizing their entire military across dozens of star systems. Our spies report unprecedented coordination between their forces and evidence of abilities that should not be possible for such a primitive species. Mordek's action may have triggered something we do not understand. The ancient seer turned his crystalline eyes toward the distant human colony where the lights burned brighter than before. His enhanced minds worked through the night on projects that would reshape their civilization. The child's death has awakened the great current in her people, Valtheros said with certainty that came from 1,000 years of observing the deeper patterns that connect all life. They are no longer the same humans who arrived on this world 20 years ago. What does that mean for our empire? Kethvar asked with growing concern in his voice. Valtheros spread his massive wings and prepared to fly toward the human settlement, where he knew difficult conversations awaited. It means that everything has changed, young Warden. The universe itself mourns the death of innocence, and it has given the humans the power to ensure such tragedy never happens again. We must choose whether to stand with them or against them, but we cannot remain neutral in what is coming. The transformation of humanity was complete, but the awakening was only the beginning of changes that would reshape the galaxy itself. The hunt for Warcast Morgek began 72 hours after the awakening, when Admiral Brooks received detailed intelligence from sources that should not have existed. Human colonies scattered across 100 light-years of space were somehow sharing information through channels that bypassed all known communication networks. Traders, miners, scientists, and settlers who had never spoken to each other before were coordinating their efforts to track down the dragon. Warriors responsible for Emma Carter's death. General Paul Hayes commanded the largest joint military operation in human history, as forces from Earth, the colonial defense fleets, and independent militia groups merged into a single coordinated army. The transformation of human consciousness had eliminated the bureaucratic delays and political rivalries that normally prevented such cooperation. Every human involved in the hunt shared the same absolute determination to bring justice for the young. Murdered Child. Commander Lucy Gray ran intelligence operations from a converted asteroid base in the neutral zone between human and Zephyrian space. Her team of analysts could process information at rates that amazed even themselves, while maintaining perfect coordination with field agents across dozens of star systems. The enhanced mental abilities granted by the awakening allowed them to see patterns in enemy communications and movement that would have been invisible before the transformation. Captain Ben Murphy led the elite hunter squadrons that were closing in on Mordek's location using tracking methods that combined human technology with intuitive insights that seemed to come from their connection to the quantum field itself. His pilots could anticipate enemy maneuvers and coordinate their attacks with precision that defied the normal limitations of space combat. They were no longer fighting as individuals, but as extensions of a single collective will. The search led through 7 star systems and involved interrogations of Zephyrian merchants, pirates, and outcasts who might have information about the rogue Warcast's hideout. But the awakened humans did not use torture or threats to extract intelligence. Instead, they projected waves of empathy and understanding that convinced even hostile aliens to cooperate voluntarily. Their enhanced ability to perceive emotional states made deception nearly impossible. On New Haven Colony, Jake Carter worked 18 hours a day, modifying mining equipment into weapons that could penetrate Zephyrian armor and energy shields. His enhanced engineering abilities allowed him to solve technical problems that had puzzled weapons designers for decades. But his real motivation came from the connection he still felt to his daughter's final moments and her belief that justice was different from revenge. Lisa Carter coordinated supply operations that kept the growing human fleet fed and equipped while they searched for Mordek across the galaxy. Her work in hydroponics had evolved into an intuitive understanding of biological systems that allowed her to develop new food sources and medical supplies in record time. Like her husband, she drew strength from Emma's memory and her message of hope for peace between species. Dr. Corinne White served as chief medical officer for the Joint Fleet while developing treatments for injuries that human doctors had never encountered before. Her enhanced diagnostic abilities allowed her to save lives that would have been lost under normal circumstances. She also counseled the families of soldiers who were struggling to understand the changes in their loved ones since the awakening. The breakthrough came when Seer Valtheros made contact with the human fleet through channels that bypassed all official Zephyrian communication networks. The ancient dragon had been monitoring the hunt for weeks and finally decided that his obligations to justice outweighed his loyalty to his own species. He transmitted detailed information about Mordek's location on the dead world of Thanatos VII, along with warnings about the weapons the rogue warriors had acquired. The Warcast has taken refuge in the ruins of an ancient Zephyrian fortress that was abandoned 3,000 years ago. Veltharos explained through encrypted quantum transmissions that the awakened humans could somehow decode. He has 12 followers and access to particle beam weapons that can destroy entire cities. But there is something else you must know about what happened to your daughter. Admiral Brooks felt his heart stop as the Dragon Seer shared recordings of Emma's final minutes that showed details the colony's cameras had missed. The child had somehow sensed Vil Theros watching from above and had looked directly at his hidden position several times during her ordeal. Her words of forgiveness had been directed not just at her torturers, but at the ancient observer who was bound by law to watch without interfering. "She knew you were there," Brooks said with wonder in his voice. "Even while she was dying, she was trying to comfort you." The great current flows strongly through some individuals, regardless of their species or age, Valtheris replied. "Your daughter possessed a connection to the universal life force that I have not seen in 1,000 years. Her death has awakened abilities in your people that will change the balance of power throughout this galaxy." The joint human fleet arrived in the Thanatos system 6 days later with overwhelming force but careful planning to minimize casualties on both sides. The awakened humans had no desire for unnecessary violence, but they were absolutely committed to bringing Mordek to justice for his crimes against innocence. Their enhanced tactical abilities allowed them to coordinate attacks across multiple fronts while anticipating enemy responses. Colonel Dan Foster led the ground assault teams that would storm the ancient fortress, while orbital bombardment units destroyed the defensive systems that protected the rogue dragons. His soldiers moved with coordination that seemed telepathic as they advanced through the ruins of a civilization that had died out millennia before humans ever left Earth. Their weapons and armor had been modified with technology that could penetrate Zephyrian defenses. Lieutenant Sarah Kim coordinated tactical operations from the command ship while processing information from dozens of sources simultaneously. Her enhanced mental abilities allowed her to track the positions and status of every soldier in the assault force while maintaining communication with orbital support units and intelligence teams. The battle unfolded according to plans that adapted in real time to changing conditions. Dr. Amy Walsh established field hospitals that could treat both human and Zephyrian wounded with equal skill and compassion. The awakened humans felt empathy for all suffering, regardless of species loyalty, and were determined to minimize harm even to their enemies. She worked alongside Zephyrian medical personnel who had volunteered to help tend to casualties from both sides of the conflict. Tech Sergeant Mike Torres managed communications and electronic warfare systems that had been enhanced beyond their original specifications by human engineers, working with intuitive insights gained from the awakening. His equipment could penetrate Zephyrian encryption systems and coordinate attacks across light years of space with precision that would have been impossible before the transformation. The siege of the ancient fortress lasted 14 hours as human forces systematically disabled Mordek's defenses while offering surrender terms that guaranteed fair treatment for all prisoners. The rogue dragons fought with desperate courage, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered by enemies who seemed to anticipate their every move. One by one, the Warcast warriors laid down their weapons as the futility of resistance became clear. Mordek himself held out until the end with 2 loyal followers in the deepest chambers of the fortress where ancient Zephyrian kings had once ruled over a galactic empire. When human soldiers finally breached the last barriers, he stood ready to fight to the death rather than face capture and trial for his crimes. But the humans who entered his final refuge were not the savage aliens he expected to find. Warcast. Mordek, you are under arrest for the torture and murder of Emma Carter, Colonel Foster announced with calm authority that came from his connection to the collective will of awakened humanity. You will be given a fair trial and the opportunity to defend your actions before judges from both our species. The dragon warrior looked into the eyes of his captors and saw not hatred or desire for revenge, but instead a kind of justice that was tempered with mercy and understanding. These humans had been transformed by their grief into something greater than they were before. They sought accountability rather than vengeance, and their power was guided by the same compassion that had allowed a dying child to forgive her torturers. "Do not understand what you have become," Mordic said as he allowed the restraints to be placed on his massive form. "You should want to tear me apart with your bare hands after what I did to your young one." "Emma taught us that hatred only creates more hatred," Foster replied as he secured the warcast for transport to the fleet. "She died believing that justice and mercy could exist together. We intend to honor her memory by proving she was right." The trial of warcast Mordic took place on a neutral space station in the border region between human and Zephyrian territories. Representatives from both species served as judges, while the awakened humans presented evidence of the dragon warriors. Crimes with meticulous attention to justice and fairness. The proceedings were broadcast across the galaxy as billions of beings watched to see how this unprecedented case would be resolved. Admiral Brooks served as the chief prosecutor, but his enhanced empathy allowed him to understand the cultural and psychological factors that had driven Mordic to commit his terrible acts. The awakened humans sought truth rather than vengeance, and their questions were designed to reveal the complex motivations behind the torture and murder of an innocent child. They wanted the galaxy to understand how fear and hatred could corrupt even noble beings. Mordic himself testified for 3 days about his beliefs that humans were a threat to Zephyrian civilization and his conviction that extreme measures were necessary to protect his people from alien influence. The dragon warrior showed no remorse for his actions, but gradually began to understand the impact of Emma's death on human consciousness when the prosecutors presented evidence of the awakening and its effects throughout human space. The child's courage in the face of death awakened abilities in our species that we did not know existed, Brooks explained to the mixed jury of humans and Zephyrians. Her final words of forgiveness and hope for peace between our peoples created a resonance in what your seer calls the Great Current. We are no longer the same beings who arrived on Kepler 442c 20 years ago. Seer Val Thuros testified as the key witness to Emma's final moments and his 1,000-year perspective on the nature of consciousness and the great current that connects all life. The ancient dragon's testimony revealed that the awakening was not just a human phenomenon, but part of a larger restoration of connections that had been lost throughout the galaxy when civilizations became isolated from the universal life force. "I have watched the rise and fall of a dozen civilizations across the centuries," Vaeltheros told the court in his voice like distant thunder. "Never have I witnessed such pure courage and forgiveness in the face of ultimate evil." The human child, Emma Carter, possessed a connection to the great current that reminded me of what my own people lost when we chose empire over enlightenment. The trial proceedings were interrupted on the 4th day when High Warden Cathfar arrived with a fleet of Zephyrian warships and demanded the immediate release of Mordic under ancient laws that protected members of the warrior caste from alien justice. The confrontation that followed would determine whether the two species moved toward peace or descended into a war that could consume the entire galaxy. Captain Nina Ross commanded the human fleet that faced off against the Zephyrian armada in the space around the neutral station. Her awakened tactical abilities allowed her to coordinate defensive positions that would protect the civilian population while preparing for combat against a technologically superior enemy. But the enhanced humans were no longer thinking like traditional military forces bound by conventional strategies. "We will not surrender Mordic to avoid a fight," Ross announced over open communication channels that both fleets could monitor. "But we also will not fire the first shot in a war that would dishonor Emma Carter's memory. She died believing that our species could find a path to peace despite our differences." The standoff lasted 18 hours while diplomats from both sides worked frantically to prevent the outbreak of hostilities that would devastate multiple star systems. But the real breakthrough came when Vel-Theros challenged Cathfar to single combat according to ancient Zephyrian traditions that superseded even the authority of the warrior caste. The duel would determine not just Mordek's fate, but the future relationship between humans and dragons. The two massive creatures faced each other in the cargo bay of the neutral station, while representatives from both species watched the confrontation that would reshape galactic politics. Cathfar was younger and stronger, but Vel-Theros had been transformed by his connection to the Great Current and his understanding of what Emma's sacrifice had awakened throughout the universe. "You have forgotten what it means to be Zephyrian," Vel-Theros declared as he spread his crystalline wings in preparation for battle. "We were once the guardians of life and consciousness throughout this galaxy. Now we have become tyrants who torture children to maintain our power over others." The duel itself lasted only minutes, but its outcome changed everything. Vel-Theros defeated Cathfar not through superior strength, but by sharing Emma's final moments through their psychic connection during combat. The younger dragon experienced the child's courage and forgiveness as if he had been present in the canyon and felt the resonance that had awakened humanity to its greater potential. Cathve surrendered not just the duel, but his opposition to the trial, when he understood what the human child had accomplished through her death. "I felt her courage," he whispered as he knelt before the ancient seer. How could such a small being possess such strength in the face of ultimate darkness? Because she was connected to the great current that flows through all conscious life. Vel-Theros replied, "The humans call it the awakening, but it is really a restoration of what was always meant to be. We can choose to join them in this new understanding, or remain trapped in the isolation that has made us cruel." The trial resumed, with Cathfar serving as a witness for the prosecution instead of defending his subordinate. His testimony about Zephyrian culture and the warrior caste mentality that had produced Mordek helped the court understand the systemic problems that needed to be addressed to prevent future tragedies. The awakened humans were interested in healing the root causes of violence rather than simply punishing individual criminals. Mordek himself was profoundly changed by witnessing the duel and hearing testimony about Emma's impact on human consciousness. For the first time since his capture, he began to understand the magnitude of what he had destroyed when he tortured an innocent child to death. The great current that Vel-Theros had shared with Cathfar gradually opened the war-caste warrior to empathy he had suppressed for centuries. "I believed I was protecting my people from alien influence," Mordek testified on the final day of his trial. "But I see now that I was protecting only my own fear and hatred." The human child showed more courage in her final minutes than I have displayed in 300 years of warfare. The verdict was unanimous among judges from both species. Mordek was found guilty of torture and murder, but sentenced to serve his punishment by working to build understanding between humans and Zephyrians, rather than facing execution or imprisonment. The awakened humans have learned from Emma's example that justice without redemption was just another form of cruelty. The aftermath of the trial transformed galactic civilization in ways that historians would study for centuries to come. The Zephyrian Empire began a process of internal reform guided by Vel-Theros and other seers who had reconnected with the great current. Warrior castes that had ruled through fear were replaced by councils that emphasized wisdom and compassion in their governance. Human colonies throughout the galaxy became centers of learning and cooperation where multiple species worked together on projects that benefited all conscious life. The enhanced abilities granted by the awakening continued to develop as human. Children born after Emma's death displayed even more remarkable connections to the quantum field that underlies reality itself. Jake and Lisa Carter established a memorial foundation that funded educational exchanges between human and Zephyrian children. who learned to see past the differences that had divided their species for generations. The first graduates of these programs would become the diplomats and leaders, who guided both civilizations toward a shared future based on mutual understanding. Dr. Karen White developed medical techniques that could treat both human and Zephyrian patients while training the next generation of healers who saw their role as serving all life rather than just their own species. Her research into the consciousness changes triggered by the awakening led to breakthrough treatments for psychological trauma and addiction across multiple worlds. The ancient fortress on Thanatos 7 was converted into a research station where scientists from dozens of species studied the Great Current and its role in connecting conscious beings throughout the universe. The ruins became a pilgrimage site for those seeking to understand how individual courage could awaken collective transformation on a galactic scale. Seer Valthuros established his permanent residence on New Haven Colony, where he served as an advisor and teacher for humans and Zephyrians learning to work together. The ancient dragon spent his days in the memorial garden that had been built where Emma died, ensuring that such darkness would never again fall upon the innocent anywhere in known space. Emma Carter's name became a watchword throughout human civilization and beyond, as other species learned about the child whose courage in the face of ultimate evil had awakened humanity to its greater potential. Her story was told in schools and academies across the galaxy as an example of how individual choices could reshape the destiny of entire civilizations.